The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Heights apartments as Marcus Thompson pulled up in his deliberately chosen Honda Civic. At 35 years old, he could have easily driven any luxury car he wanted. His net worth of $300 million made sure of that. But today, he was playing a different role. Marcus adjusted his simple polo shirt and khaki pants, an outfit that was far from the tailored suits he usually wore as CEO of Thompson Technologies. He had spent weeks planning this moment, right down to the manufactured documents showing a modest professional's salary of $65,000 a year. The building itself was decent enough, a four-story brick structure with neat landscaping and clean windows. But Marcus had chosen it for a specific reason. Over the past 6 months, his company's human resources department had received 3 separate complaints from black employees who had tried to rent apartments here. All of them had been turned away with different excuses, while their white colleagues had secured units easily. Richard Werner, the building's owner, stood waiting at the entrance. He was a tall man in his 60s, with graying hair and an expensive watch that seemed out of place with his casual clothes. His smile wavered slightly as Marcus approached, something that didn't go unnoticed. "You must be Marcus Thompson," Werner said, his tone professionally distant. "I wasn't expecting." "Well, your phone voice sounded different." Marcus had heard this before, the subtle surprise when people realized he was black. He simply smiled and extended his hand. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for meeting me on a Saturday." Werner's handshake was brief. "Let's see the apartment. I should mention that we've had several interested parties." As they walked through the building, Marcus noticed how Werner kept glancing at him sideways. The landlord's running commentary was revealing. "We have a very quiet community here. We enforce strict rules. The credit check process is very thorough." The apartment itself was Unit 2B, a modest 2-bedroom with basic amenities. Marcus watched as Werner rushed through the showing, barely pointing out features he had extensively detailed in online listings. "The rent is $1,200 per month," Werner said, then quickly added, "plus first and last month's deposit. And we'll need extensive background checks, employment verification, and personal references. The process can take several weeks." Marcus had already done his research. Last week, his private investigator had inquired about the same unit. As a white applicant, she had been quoted $1,100 with a simple security deposit and a promise of quick approval. "That all sounds reasonable," Marcus said calmly, pulling out a folder of pre-prepared documents. "I have everything here: bank statements, pay stubs, references, and my current credit report showing a score of 820. Werner seemed taken aback by the preparation. He flipped through the papers, frowning slightly as each document proved immaculate. Marcus could almost see the wheels turning in the landlord's head, searching for a reason to reject the application. "Well," Werner finally said, "I'll need to review everything carefully. We have several other applications pending. I'll let you know within 2 weeks." The online listing said immediate availability. Marcus replied softly, "I'd be happy to provide the deposits today if the unit is available." Trapped by his own advertising, Werner reluctantly nodded. "Fine, we can start the paperwork. But remember, this is a probationary lease. Any violations, any late payments, and we'll have to terminate the agreement." As Marcus signed the lease, he noticed how Werner emphasized every single rule and restriction. The landlord had no idea that while he was lecturing about proper garbage disposal and noise limitations, Marcus was already documenting every interaction with his phone's recording app. 2 hours later, Marcus stood alone in his new apartment. He pulled out his real phone, not the basic Android he'd shown Werner, but the latest iPhone he used for business. He dialed his chief of security. "I'm in," Marcus said quietly. "Start the surveillance setup tonight. I want everything recorded. Every interaction, every maintenance request, every random inspection he tries to conduct. And get me detailed records of every tenant turnover in this building for the past 5 years." As he hung up, Marcus looked around the apartment that would be his home for the next few months. He hadn't built a $300 million tech company by being naive. He knew exactly what was coming: the delayed maintenance, the sudden inspections, the false complaints. But this time, someone was finally going to document it all. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across his new living room. Marcus Thompson, the undercover millionaire, was ready to begin his mission to expose the ugly truth of housing discrimination, one carefully documented day at a time. The first month at Cedar Heights Apartments proved exactly what Marcus Thompson had suspected. As he sat in his modest apartment looking at his laptop screen, the spreadsheet before him told a clear story. In just 30 days, he had documented 23 different instances of discriminatory treatment. It started with the broken bathroom faucet. 3 days after moving in, Marcus noticed it was leaking badly. He followed the proper procedure, submitting a maintenance request through the building's online system. Days passed with no response. After a week, he submitted another request. Still nothing. What made it interesting was what happened next door. Sarah Williams, his white neighbor in apartment 2A, had submitted a maintenance request for the same issue just yesterday. Marcus watched through his peephole this morning as the maintenance man arrived at her door within 24 hours of her complaint. "Just doing my job, ma'am," the maintenance man had said cheerfully to Sarah. "Mr. Werner wants us to handle these things right away to prevent water damage." Marcus documented everything with his hidden cameras. The small devices, expertly placed by his security team, recorded every interaction in the hallways. They even caught Werner giving tours to potential new tenants, all of whom happened to be white. The heating system was the next issue. October brought unusually cold weather, but Marcus's radiator remained stubbornly cold. This time, he decided to test something. He asked Sarah if she would call about her heating too. "Oh, that's strange," Sarah had said. "Mine's working fine, but I'll call Mr. Werner for you. Maybe he'll respond faster to me." She was right. Within 2 hours of Sarah's call, Werner himself knocked on Marcus's door. "Miss Williams mentioned your heating," Werner said, not bothering to hide his annoyance. "You should have told me directly instead of bothering other tenants." Marcus kept his voice calm and professional. "I submitted 3 maintenance requests over the past weeks, sir. I have copies of all of them." Werner's face tightened. "Well, maybe if you kept your apartment cleaner, the system would work better. I noticed your windows were dirty last week." The windows were spotless. Marcus made sure of that, but he simply nodded and documented the interaction in his growing file of evidence. The pattern continued with the parking situation. Despite Marcus having an assigned spot clearly marked 2B, he often found other cars parked there. When he complained, Werner suggested he park on the street if it's such a big problem. Yet when the tenant in 3C, a white lawyer, had the same issue, Werner immediately had the offending car towed. Marcus's private investigator team was busy too. They discovered that in the past year, 8 black families had moved out of Cedar Heights Apartments. All of them had left before their leases ended. The investigators interviewed 6 of these former tenants, and their stories were eerily similar. "He kept finding reasons to inspect our apartment," one former tenant said. "Then the rent suddenly went up mid-lease because of renovations that never happened." Another shared, "Our maintenance requests were ignored. When we complained, he said we were being difficult tenants. We finally left when the heating stopped working in winter." One evening, as Marcus was reviewing these reports, he heard a commotion in the hallway. Looking through his peephole, he saw Werner showing an apartment to a young black couple. "Unfortunately," Werner was saying, "the unit was just rented this morning. Such bad timing. But I can recommend some other buildings in a different neighborhood." Marcus checked the building's website on his phone. The unit was still listed as available. Later that night, Marcus sent all his documented evidence to his legal team. The videos, maintenance requests, interviews, and website screenshots were building a solid case. His lawyers were particularly interested in the pattern of selective maintenance responses and the mysterious disappearance of his online maintenance requests from the building system. "Keep documenting everything," his lawyer advised during their secure video call. "We need to show this isn't just a few isolated incidents. This is systematic discrimination." Marcus looked out his window at the city lights. In his real life, he was used to boardrooms and tech conferences, not dealing with leaky faucets and broken heaters. But this undercover mission was perhaps the most important work he'd ever done. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new incidents to document, and new evidence to collect. The prejudiced landlord had no idea that his every move was being watched, recorded, and added to a case that would eventually expose years of housing discrimination. For now, Marcus Thompson, the secret millionaire, continued his patient observation, knowing that justice would come in due time. 2 months into his stay at Cedar Heights Apartments, Marcus Thompson was awakened by loud knocking at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Through his hidden camera feed, he could see Richard Werner standing outside his door, accompanied by 2 maintenance workers. Surprise inspection. Werner announced as soon as Marcus opened the door, "We've received multiple noise complaints about your unit." Marcus kept his face neutral, though he knew this was a lie. His sophisticated recording equipment had proven his apartment was one of the quietest in the building. In fact, he spent most evenings quietly working on his laptop or reading. "I wasn't aware of any complaints," Marcus said calmly, letting them enter. "Which neighbors complained?" Werner waved his hand dismissively. "That's confidential information. Now, what's this?" He pointed to the small desk where Marcus worked. "Are you running a business from this apartment? That's against the lease terms." "It's just my work-from-home setup for my job," Marcus explained. "The same job I listed on my rental application." The landlord ignored him, moving through the apartment like a detective searching for evidence. He ran his finger along spotless windowsills, checked inside the immaculate refrigerator, and scrutinized the perfectly organized closets. "Your lease specifically prohibits excessive storage," Werner said, pointing to Marcus's neatly arranged closet. "This could be a fire hazard." One of the maintenance workers looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Werner, this is actually one of the cleanest units I've seen." Werner silenced him with a sharp look. "Check the bathroom. I'm sure there's water damage from all his complaints about the faucet." While they inspected his bathroom, Marcus texted his neighbor Sarah, "Any noise complaints about my apartment?" Her response came quickly. "What? No way. You're the quietest neighbor I've ever had. I actually just told Mr. Werner yesterday how respectful you are." Marcus added this conversation to his evidence file. Meanwhile, Werner was making a show of writing notes on his clipboard. "We've also had reports of unauthorized visitors," Werner declared. "Several tenants said they've seen different people coming to your apartment." The unauthorized visitors were Marcus's legal team and private investigators who always visited during allowed hours. Meanwhile, Marcus had documented white tenants hosting loud parties with dozens of guests, none of which received any complaints from Werner. "Mr. Werner," Marcus said quietly, "I have security cameras in my apartment for my personal safety. They record 24/7 and can prove there have been no noise violations or unauthorized visitors." Werner's face reddened. "Cameras? That's another lease violation. This is private property." "The lease allows security devices as long as they don't damage the property," Marcus quoted from memory. "I have the clause right here." Frustrated by not finding any violations, Werner moved to his next tactic. He walked to the living room window and opened it. A cold draft filled the room. "Look at this mold," Werner exclaimed, pointing to what was clearly a water stain from before Marcus moved in. "This is a serious health violation. We might have to terminate your lease for the safety of other tenants." Marcus had photographed and documented that same stain during his move-in inspection. "That's interesting," he said, pulling out his phone. "I have photos showing that stain was here when I moved in. I reported it on my initial inspection form." Werner's face grew darker. "Well, there's still the noise complaints to address. Consider this your first warning. 3 warnings and we'll begin eviction proceedings." After they left, Marcus called an emergency meeting with his legal team. Over a secure video call, he shared the morning's recordings. "He's escalating faster than we expected," his lawyer observed. "This is textbook harassment. The false complaints, surprise inspections, threats of eviction, all because you're the only black tenant who hasn't been pushed out." Marcus agreed. He's getting desperate. "The maintenance worker told me privately that Werner's been pressuring staff to find lease violations in my apartment." That evening, Marcus received additional support for his case. Sarah from next door sent him security footage from her doorbell camera, showing Werner telling other tenants to keep an eye on Marcus's apartment and report any suspicious activity. In his luxury office downtown, Marcus's legal team was building an airtight case. They had statements from former tenants, video evidence, documentation of false complaints, and now proof of Werner encouraging tenant surveillance based on racial profiling. But Werner wasn't done yet. As Marcus reviewed the day's events, Another text arrived from Sarah. Just heard Werner on the phone. He's planning something big. Be careful. The undercover millionaire smiled grimly. Let Werner plan whatever he wanted. Every move the prejudiced landlord made only strengthened the case against him. The next move would be critical, and Marcus Thompson was ready for whatever came next. On a cold Monday morning, Marcus Thompson found an official-looking envelope taped to his door. Inside was an eviction notice, filled with so many false claims that he almost laughed out loud. Almost. Notice of LEA's termination and Evict. The paper screamed in bold letters. Werner had really outdone himself this time. Marcus read through the list of alleged violations. 3 months of late rent payments. Unauthorized business operations from the apartment. Excessive noise disturbances. Property damage. Unauthorized modifications to the unit. Violation of guest policies. Failure to maintain a clean and sanitary living space. Every single claim was false. Marcus had paid his rent 5 days early each month, with documented bank transfers to prove it. His hidden cameras showed his apartment was spotless, and he had fewer visitors than any other tenant in the building. Just then, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, his next-door neighbor. OMG, did you see what's happening to Jeremy in 4C? Jeremy was one of the few other minority tenants in the building. Marcus immediately pulled up the feed from his hallway cameras. Upstairs, Werner was posting another eviction notice. This is ridiculous. Jeremy's voice carried through the building. I've lived here for 3 years with no problems. Rules are rules, Werner's smug voice replied. Maybe if you people learn to follow them. Marcus quickly sent the video clip to his legal team. This was the first time Werner had slipped and made an openly racist comment on camera. Later that morning, Marcus walked through the building, talking to other tenants. He discovered something interesting. Werner had served eviction notices to all 4 remaining minority tenants in the building. Meanwhile, white tenants with actual lease violations were left alone. They'd had a wild party last weekend, Sarah told Marcus, pointing to 3A, broken bottles in the hallway, music until 4 a.m. Werner didn't say a word to them. Marcus's phone rang. It was his private investigator with more news. You need to see this, the investigator said. We found an online landlord forum where Werner's been posting. He's been bragging about his technique for keeping his buildings high class, his code word for white only. Back in his apartment, Marcus received another surprise visit from Werner, who barged in without the required 24-hour notice. I see you got my notice, Werner said, his voice dripping with fake concern. I'm here to document more violations. Marcus noticed Werner was filming with his phone, probably trying to manufacture evidence for court. 2 could play that game. Mr. Werner, Marcus said calmly, would you like to explain why my rent payments, which were all made early, are listed as late on this notice? Werner's face reddened. Our records show differently. Maybe your kind has trouble keeping track of dates. Another racist comment caught on camera. Marcus's hidden security system was recording everything. And these noise complaints, Marcus continued. Could you show me the reports? A lease requires documented complaints to be shared with tenants. I don't have to show you anything. Werner snapped. You have 3 days to vacate, or I'll have the sheriff remove you. After Werner stormed out, Marcus called an emergency meeting with his legal team via secure video chat. This is perfect, his lawyer said, reviewing the new evidence. He's given us everything we need. Documented false claims, racial discrimination, illegal entry, harassing behavior, and now explicit racist comments on camera. Marcus nodded. What about the other tenants he's trying to evict? We've already contacted them, another lawyer replied. All 4 have agreed to join the lawsuit. We also have statements from 12 former tenants who were forced out under similar circumstances. That evening, Marcus received a certified letter from Werner's lawyer, filled with more false claims and threatening language. He added it to his growing file of evidence. Looking out his window, Marcus saw Werner showing an apartment to a young white couple, the same apartment Jeremy from 4C was being evicted from. Too many people think this kind of discrimination doesn't happen anymore, Marcus said to himself, watching Werner shake hands with the couple. They think we're making it up or exaggerating. His phone buzzed with a message from his legal team. Everything's ready. Should we proceed with the counteraction? Marcus typed back a simple reply, "Not yet. The court needs to see his full pattern of behavior. Give him enough rope to hang himself." The undercover millionaire sat back in his chair, reviewing the eviction notice one more time. Werner thought he was dealing with a powerless tenant he could easily bully. He had no idea that his own actions were about to bring his entire discriminatory empire crashing down. Marcus Thompson sat in his temporary command center, a small coffee shop 3 blocks from Cedar Heights apartments. Around him, his team of private investigators spread out their latest findings across the table. "You won't believe what we found," said Lisa Chen, his lead investigator. She opened her laptop, revealing a spreadsheet of Werner's rental history. In the past 5 years, Werner has owned 7 different apartment buildings in this city. Marcus leaned forward, studying the data. The pattern was shocking even to him. "Look at the turnover rates," Lisa pointed out. "Every time the number of minority tenants in a building reaches 20%, he suddenly finds reasons to evict them. He's been doing this for years, just moving from building to building." Another investigator, James Rodriguez, pulled out a stack of interviews. "We talked to former maintenance workers from all 7 buildings. 3 of them admitted Werner had a secret policy. They were told to delay repairs for minority tenants, hoping they'd get frustrated and leave." Marcus's phone buzzed. It was Sarah from next door, who had become his trusted ally in the building. "Werner's in the lobby right now," her text read. "He's telling the new white tenants moving in that they're lucky because he's cleaning up the building. I recorded everything on my phone." Just then, one of Marcus's legal team members arrived at the coffee shop. Barbara Wong had been investigating Werner's financial records. "We found something big," Barbara said, laying out bank statements. "Werner's been charging minority tenants higher security deposits, but recording lower amounts in his official books. The difference goes to his personal account. It's not just discrimination, it's fraud." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, processing all this information. His simple investigation into one building had uncovered an entire system of housing discrimination. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed. Jeremy from apartment 4C walked in, looking worried. "Marcus, you need to see this," Jeremy said, pulling out his phone. "Werner hired some guys to change my locks today, even though I have 3 days left to respond to the eviction notice. My kids couldn't get in after school. When I called the police, Werner showed them fake paperwork saying I'd agreed to move out early." Marcus's security team had caught the whole incident on camera. Werner hadn't realized that Marcus had installed hidden cameras in all the building's public areas, not just near his own apartment. "There's more," Jeremy continued. "I talked to the couple he's trying to rent my apartment to. They said Werner offered them a special discount, $200 less than what I'm paying. He told them he's upgrading the quality of tenants in the building." Marcus's phone lit up with another message. This one was from his tech team, who had been monitoring Werner's online activities. "Boss, we found his emails," the message read. "He's part of a landlord group that shares tips about keeping buildings exclusive. They even have a secret rating system for different types of tenants. It's all coded language, but it's clearly racial profiling." Lisa pulled up more data on her laptop. "We've mapped out all his properties. Every building follows the same pattern. Start with diverse tenants, then gradually push out minority residents using fake complaints, selective enforcement, and harassment." Marcus stood up and walked to the coffee shop window, looking in the direction of Cedar Heights apartments. In his real life as a tech CEO, he dealt with complex problems every day. But this was different. This wasn't about computer code or profit margins. This was about people's lives, their homes, their dignity. "Okay," he said, turning back to his team. "We're not just building a case against one landlord anymore. We're exposing an entire system. I want every email, every bank record, every maintenance request. I want interviews with current and former tenants from all 7 buildings. And I want to know about every other landlord in that secret group." Barbara looked up from her legal papers. "Werner's eviction hearing against you is in 3 days. Should we reveal everything then?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. Let him present his false claims first. Let him lie under oath. Then we'll show him who he's really been messing with." As his team packed up their evidence, Marcus received one final text from Sarah. "Werner's showing another apartment to a white family. He's telling them by next month they won't have to worry about having any troublesome neighbors." Marcus smiled grimly. Little did Werner know, by next month he'd be facing not just a legal battle, but a complete exposure of his discriminatory empire. The undercover millionaire had gone looking for evidence of housing discrimination in one building. Instead, he'd uncovered an entire network of systemic racism that was about to come crashing down. The morning of the eviction hearing arrived with a buzz of tension in the air. The small county courthouse had never seen such an unusual scene unfold before. Richard Werner sat confidently at his table, wearing his usual gray suit and a smug smile. He kept checking his watch, probably hoping Marcus Johnson wouldn't show up at all. When the courthouse doors opened at exactly 9:28 a.m., Werner's smile quickly disappeared. Instead of seeing Marcus in his usual casual clothes, everyone in the courtroom gasped at what they saw. Marcus walked in wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than Werner's monthly mortgage payment. Behind him came 6 people in expensive business attire, all carrying leather briefcases and wearing serious expressions. "Who are all these people?" Werner whispered nervously to his single lawyer. The judge, Mrs. Thompson, looked up from her papers with raised eyebrows. She hadn't expected such a crowd for a simple eviction case. "Mr. Johnson, would you please introduce your team?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. Marcus stepped forward, standing tall and confident. For the first time, people could see him for who he really was, not the quiet tenant in apartment 4B, but a powerful businessman who commanded respect. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice clear and strong, "I'm Marcus Johnson, CEO of Tech Future Innovations, one of the largest software companies in Silicon Valley. These are my attorneys from Maxwell and Brown Law Firm." He gestured to his legal team, who placed their briefcases on the table with perfect timing. Werner's face turned pale. His lawyer started shuffling through papers frantically, probably realizing they were in trouble. Marcus's lead attorney, Sarah Chen, stood up and started setting up a projector. "Your Honor, we have prepared a comprehensive presentation of evidence," she said, clicking through to the first slide. What happened next was like watching a perfectly planned chess game. Marcus's team showed video after video of Werner's discriminatory behavior. There were security camera clips showing Werner following Marcus around the building. They played recorded phone conversations where Werner spoke rudely to Marcus, but was sweet as honey to other tenants. They even had emails Werner had sent to his building manager, using racist language to describe Marcus. But the biggest surprise came when other tenants started walking into the courtroom. Mrs. Jackson, an elderly black woman from the 2nd floor. Mr. Rodriguez, a Hispanic father from the 3rd floor. Ms. Chen, an Asian graduate student from the 5th floor. One by one, they stood up to tell their stories of how Werner had treated them unfairly. Werner kept shaking his head, his face getting redder by the minute. "This is ridiculous," he burst out. "He tricked me. He pretended to be poor." The judge banged her gavel. "Mr. Werner, control yourself," she warned. Marcus stood up again, his voice calm but powerful. "Your Honor, I didn't trick anyone. I simply rented an apartment, paid my rent on time, and followed all rules. The only difference was that Mr. Werner didn't know my bank account balance." He pulled out his phone and showed his company's website, where his photo was right there on the leadership team page. "What we've uncovered here," Marcus continued, "is a pattern of discrimination that goes beyond just me. Mr. Werner has been treating tenants differently based on their race for years. We have proof." He nodded to his team, who started passing out thick folders to the judge. Werner's lawyer looked through the evidence and whispered something in his client's ear. Werner's face went from red to white. He knew he was in serious trouble. The judge took off her glasses and looked directly at Werner. "Mr. Werner, this is no longer a simple eviction case. What I'm seeing here is serious evidence of housing discrimination, which is a federal offense." Marcus's team wasn't done yet. They showed financial records proving Werner charged higher deposits to minority tenants. They had maintenance records showing how white tenants got same-day repairs while others waited weeks. They even had text messages Werner had sent to his friends bragging about how he kept his building exclusive. By the end of the presentation, the small courtroom was completely silent. Everyone was staring at Werner, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. His lawyer was already making notes about possible plea deals. The judge looked at her watch. What was supposed to be a quick morning eviction hearing had turned into one of the biggest housing discrimination cases the county had ever seen. She knew, and everyone in that courtroom knew that things would never be the same at 1242 Maple Street Apartments. Marcus stood there, no longer pretending to be anything less than what he was, a millionaire CEO who had just exposed years of housing discrimination. But more importantly, he stood as someone who had given hope to every tenant who had ever felt powerless against an unfair system. The news of Marcus Johnson's revelation spread like wildfire through the city. Local news stations parked their vans outside the courthouse, and reporters tried to catch Werner leaving through the back doors. But this was just the beginning of a much bigger legal battle that would last for the next 3 months. Marcus's legal team set up a temporary office in the community room of the apartment building. Every day, more tenants came forward to tell their stories. The team's youngest lawyer, David Chen, sat for hours listening to people describe their experiences with Werner's unfair treatment. We found 37 cases of clear discrimination in just the past 2 years. Sarah Chen told Marcus one evening, spreading papers across the table. They had discovered Werner had been charging black tenants an average of $300 more in security deposits than white tenants. Hispanic families were regularly denied maintenance requests, and Asian students were forced to provide extra documentation for their applications. Werner's lawyers tried to handle the situation quickly and quietly. One morning, they arrived at Marcus's office with a settlement offer of $2 million. "This can all go away," they said, sliding the paper across the table. "Just sign here." Marcus picked up the paper, looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, and then ripped it in half. "This isn't about money," he said calmly. "This is about justice." The case got bigger when local housing rights groups got involved. They brought forward evidence showing Werner owned 5 other buildings in different cities, all with similar patterns of discrimination. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had lived in one of Werner's other buildings, testified about how her family had been evicted just one day after they complained about a broken heater in the middle of winter. Werner's reputation started falling apart. His business partners stopped taking his calls. Other landlords in the city distanced themselves from him. His own daughter, who worked as a real estate agent, publicly spoke out against her father's actions. The courthouse became crowded every day with people wanting to watch the case. Some drove from other cities just to see what was happening. Local civil rights leaders gave speeches on the courthouse steps, calling this case a turning point in the fight against housing discrimination. Werner tried everything to save himself. He went on local TV to apologize, claiming he had changed and was a different person now. But then Marcus's team found racist emails Werner had sent just 2 days after his TV appearance, and his fake apology was exposed. One of the most powerful moments came when 80-year-old Mr. Thompson took the stand. With tears in his eyes, he told the court how he had tried to rent from Werner's building 7 different times over 20 years, and each time he was told there were no vacancies, only to see the apartments rented to white tenants days later. "I fought in Vietnam for this country," Mr. Thompson said quietly. "All I wanted was a nice place to live." The evidence kept piling up. Marcus's team found hidden rules for screening certain types of tenants, fake waiting lists used to delay minority applications, secret recordings of Werner teaching his staff how to discourage unwanted applicants, bank records showing different deposit amounts based on tenants' race, maintenance logs proving repairs were delayed for minority tenants. Werner's lawyers looked more worried every day. They kept bringing new settlement offers, each one bigger than the last. But Marcus refused them all. He wanted the truth to come out in public, where everyone could see it. The case attracted national attention. Civil rights lawyers from big cities flew in to watch the proceedings. Housing rights groups used the case as an example in their training materials. Law students sat in the courtroom taking notes, knowing they were watching history being made. By the end of the 3rd month, Werner's legal team was desperate. Their client's reputation was destroyed, his business was falling apart, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. They made one last attempt to settle the case privately. But Marcus stood firm. He remembered all the people who had shared their stories, the families who had been turned away, the students who had been overcharged, the elderly who had been disrespected. He knew this case was bigger than just him now. As the legal battle entered its final week, everyone could feel something big was about to happen. Werner looked tired and defeated in court, while Marcus sat straight and determined. The judge had seen enough evidence to make a decision that would change housing practices in the city forever. The only question left was, how hard would the hammer of justice fall on Richard Werner?